I wasn't supposed to be home until Sunday night. That was the plan, at least 3 days in the Sawtooths with my climbing group, a long drive back, and a quick turnaround before Monday's strategy meeting. But the weather shifted hard late Friday, the forecast looked grim, and we decided to cut the expedition short. By Saturday afternoon, I was already halfway down the mountain, boots soaked, sore in every limb, but with this half-crazy excitement about surprising Kathleen. I even grabbed takeout from her favorite Mediterranean spot, chicken shawarma and extra hummus, because she always runs out before I do. I pulled into the driveway just after 6. Our street was unusually quiet for a weekend. A couple of kids across the cul-de-sac were tossing a basketball back and forth under the early evening light, but that was it. I led the engine, left my bag in the car, and grabbed the food. I figured maybe we'd eat on the couch and watch that documentary she'd bookmarked 2 weeks ago, the one she claimed to be dying to see but somehow never found the time for. The front door creaked as I opened it. The house was still, the kind of still that doesn't feel peaceful but vacant, like I'd walked in on something or someone who wasn't expecting me. I set the bag on the entry table and called out, "Kath." No answer. I moved toward the living room, and that's when I saw them, 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. Not one. 2. One still half full, the deep red of a bold wine, the kind she usually saves for company. The second glass had faint smudges, fingerprints, lipstick near the rim. I'm no forensic expert, but it wasn't difficult to guess they'd both been used recently. Then something else, the window. Big bay glass overlooking the yard, usually spotless. But now it had visible palm prints smeared across the inside, like someone had leaned against it with their hands, maybe peering out or bracing themselves during whatever had happened here. A soft clink echoed from upstairs, then the sound of running water. The shower. I stood there in the middle of the living room, suddenly feeling like a trespasser in my own house. She came down a few minutes later, wrapped in her white robe, damp hair clinging to her shoulders, a towel in her hand. She looked surprised to see me, but only for a moment. Her expression morphed with the kind of ease that only comes from practice. Shock turned to delight, like someone flipping a switch. "Trevor, you're home early," she said, her voice pitched just slightly higher than usual. "What happened to Sunday?" "Forecast changed," I replied. "Thunderstorms rolling in tonight, so we cut it short." She nodded, walking past me as she dried her hair. "Smart move. Those ridges get nasty in bad weather." I said nothing, just stared at the glasses. Her eyes followed mine. "Oh, those." She waved a hand dismissively. "Leslie dropped by earlier. We had a quick catch-up. You know, one of her infamous fence sessions. You'd have run for the hills." "Didn't know you and Leslie were drinking Merlot these days," I said quietly. She smiled. "It was Shiraz. Leslie's latest phase. She brought it over." I waited, hoping she'd offer something else, anything else to make it feel natural. But she didn't. Just walked to the kitchen, humming softly as she opened the fridge. No mention of why there were smudges on the window. No apology for not cleaning up. No curiosity about how the trip went. Just avoidance smoothed over with confidence. I followed her into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, watching her movements. "Casual, graceful, practiced." "You didn't hear me come in?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "The water was running. Must have drowned it out." "Sorry." Then she pulled out a lemon, started slicing it for tea like this was any other Saturday. I knew then that something was off. Not just the wine, not just the window. It was her, how quickly she'd recovered from surprise, how easily she redirected the conversation. Kathleen was always quick-witted, but this wasn't wit. This was something else. A performance. "So, who else came by?" I asked. "Just Leslie," she said without hesitation, without looking up. "No one else." She laughed. "Why? You think I'm running a salon while you're hanging off cliffs?" It was meant to be a joke, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I didn't laugh. She noticed. "I know it's weird to see 2 glasses," she added after a pause, "but I promise nothing shady. You're acting like you caught me mid-affair." I raised an eyebrow. "Your words." She sighed and turned to face me, crossing her arms. "Look, you're gone a lot. I'm not saying it's your fault, but maybe it wouldn't feel so suspicious if we spent more time together." That hit me in a weird place, like she was deflecting, trying to build a preemptive justification. I wanted to argue, but I was too stunned to start anything. The room felt colder than it should have. And maybe it was just me, but the faint scent of cologne, not mine, still lingered near the stairwell. She moved closer, wrapped her arms around me, and rested her head against my shoulder. "I missed you," she whispered. I hugged her back because it felt like the right thing to do, but something in me stayed distant. Like my body was going through the motions while my brain stayed rooted in the living room, still staring at those wine glasses. That night, after dinner, we curled up on the couch and watched the documentary. She laughed at the right parts, made comments, even reached for my hand a few times. But I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the window, to the half-full glass, to the way she'd walked down those stairs too calm for someone caught off guard. When she finally fell asleep, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to become one of those paranoid husbands who started monitoring texts and tracking phone calls. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that I'd come home early and stepped into a life that was slightly misaligned from the one I thought I was living. A glass stain. A smudge on the window. A voice just a little too steady. It didn't prove anything. But it didn't feel like nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid there beside Kathleen, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, staring up at the ceiling as if some hidden answer might appear in the shadows above. That cold feeling from earlier hadn't faded. It had dug in, taken root, and started whispering all kinds of things I didn't want to hear. For the next few days, I tried to shake it. I told myself I was overreacting, that coming home early and catching a small domestic moment out of context had triggered some absurd paranoia. People have wine. People lean on windows. None of it meant anything. But it didn't sit right. Not because of the wine or the smudges. Not even because of her perfectly rehearsed reaction. It didn't sit right because, once I let myself look closer, I realized this wasn't the first time I'd felt it, that twist in the gut that says something's off. Over the following week, I started noticing things I hadn't before, or maybe things I'd just trained myself to ignore. Kathleen had developed this new habit over the last few months. She'd pull into the driveway, sit in the car for several minutes, then enter the house already changed. I used to think it was just something efficient. Maybe she didn't want to drag her gym clothes or office outfit inside. But more and more, I noticed the transition didn't match her story. She'd walk in wearing outfits too elegant for a girls' night, too tailored for a therapy session. Once, she claimed she'd been at a spa retreat but came back with smoky eyeliner and that distinctly musky scent, the kind that never comes from eucalyptus or candles. It was cologne. And it definitely wasn't mine. She started locking her phone more. Not just the usual face scan, but layered passwords, disappearing messages. When I'd ask her what she was doing, she'd joke about how I was becoming one of those guys, the kind who peered over shoulders and assumed the worst. And she always said it with a laugh, that easy, teasing tone that made me feel like I was the one being ridiculous. Her laptop became another red flag. One evening, she left it open on the kitchen counter while grabbing something from the garage. A document was up, just a blank email draft. It caught my eye only because of the subject line, private transfers, itinerary proposal. At first, I thought it was work-related. Kathleen worked in wellness consulting, helping burned-out professionals find luxury escape routes. Private transfers made sense in that world. But when I scrolled down, I saw the salutation, Jay, this is the second option I mentioned. We could leave early and reroute via A. She came back before I could finish reading and I quickly clicked away. She didn't say anything, just glanced at me, her smile tight. Later, the draft was gone. I told myself it was probably business. But it didn't feel like business. Then there were the stories that didn't add up. Friends who she said she'd seen but later claimed hadn't talked to in weeks. Events that changed timelines. Excuses about client meetings that turned out to be solo dinners she couldn't recall the location of. It wasn't obvious, but it was murky. And Kathleen never used to be murky. But the moment that really shattered my ability to keep pretending came from someone completely unexpected. I was grabbing coffee at work when one of my coworkers, Dean, leaned over with a smirk and said, "Hey, man. Your wife's got a twin in Boise. Swear I saw her last week, downtown, tall guy in mirrored sunglasses, real GQ-looking type. They were walking out of that tapas place, laughing like they owned the world." I laughed along, playing it off. Nah, she's probably got a clone. Kathleen hates tapas. But my stomach twisted. Because that's where she was that night. I remember it clearly. She had called to say she was going to a friend's house to decompress after a heavy client breakthrough. She said they were doing facials and journaling. I even made a joke about her joining a coven. Now I was starting to feel like the punchline. I didn't confront her about any of this, not yet. Instead, I started keeping a quiet tally. A mental note here, a second look there. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't invading her privacy. I just watched. Carefully. Silently. And I kept thinking about that wine glass. The lipstick on it. The smudges on the glass. The carefully folded robe hanging in the bathroom, perfectly aligned like it had been posed. The way she dried her hair just long enough to make it seem casual but still looked like she'd rushed. Like someone who'd had to clean up a scene fast. I remembered, too, the first time we ever drank wine together years ago before marriage. She said she didn't like Merlot because it tasted like guilt. I didn't know what she meant then. Now I wondered if I finally did. Our conversations started to shift in tone. She asked more often when I'd be away next. Talked about how space was healthy for relationships. Began reminding me that independence was important to her. That I needed to respect her time, her routine, her new commitments. And when I didn't respond enthusiastically, she acted like I was trying to trap her. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sun set, and she turned to me and said, "You're quieter these days." I looked at her, trying to find the right answer. "Just tired, I guess." She smiled almost sympathetically. "You work too much. You've always worked too much. Maybe it's time you found a better balance. For both of us." Her voice was soft, but the message was pointed. And something in her eyes told me that she had already found her version of balance. I just wasn't part of it. That night, I replayed Dean's comment over and over. The tall guy in mirrored sunglasses. The Tapas restaurant. Her smile when she told me I was imagining things. It all started lining up. All the missed calls. The late nights. The secrecy. I could feel the truth taking shape, rising like fog lifting from a field. And the more I saw, the harder it became to look away. I didn't want to be this guy. The suspicious husband. The one retracing conversations and decoding perfume notes like some budget detective. But I also didn't want to be the last to know. I didn't want to look back one day and realize I'd ignored all the signs because the truth was too painful to accept. Because the truth was starting to show itself. And once it did, there'd be no going back. A week later, we were at Kathleen's brother's birthday dinner. The kind of event she usually dreaded, loud rooftop venue, half the guests from tech startups she barely tolerated. But this time, she was oddly enthusiastic. She spent an hour picking out her outfit, settled on a silk blouse I hadn't seen before, and actually hummed while getting ready. That alone would have been enough to make me suspicious. Kathleen didn't hum. Not unless something or someone had her feeling especially good. The party was on the roof of a boutique hotel in downtown Boise where her brother, Chris, had reserved a section of the terrace. There were string lights, a rented DJ, and a bar serving signature cocktails with names like Startup Spritz and Crypto Mule. I tried to enjoy it, tried to keep my face neutral as we mingled. I made small talk with a few familiar faces, but my eyes kept drifting toward her. And then I saw him. Tall, athletic build, mirrored sunglasses even as the sun dipped below the skyline. His shirt was crisp, his watch glinting with every motion. And there was something else, he looked completely at ease here. Like the crowd, the lights, the rooftop breeze, they were his domain. He stood at the bar, laughing. And next to him? Kathleen. They were facing each other too closely. Her body was tilted toward his, her expression brighter than it had been in weeks. She threw her head back in a way I hadn't seen since. God, I didn't even know when. I watched, heart pounding, as she reached out and touched his wrist, then leaned in to whisper something. He laughed again, casually placing a hand on her back. I stood frozen for a moment, watching them like a stranger watching a scene in a film. She hadn't told me she knew anyone else at this party aside from Chris and his girlfriend. She certainly hadn't said she'd be spending it glued to some mystery man's side. I walked away. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I found Chris near the edge of the rooftop talking with one of his old college buddies. When he saw me, he waved and came over. "Trevor. Glad you guys could make it. Kathleen said you were on the fence." "She did?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Funny. She seemed pretty committed." Chris gave me a puzzled look, then shrugged. "Well, she looked excited tonight. Happy to see her that way, honestly. She's been different." He said it lightly, but I caught the hesitation in his voice. Later in the evening, as things began to wind down, I slipped away from the crowd and found a quiet hallway just off the main terrace. Chris joined me a few minutes later, holding a beer, eyebrows raised. "Everything okay?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I debated whether I should ask. Whether it was fair to drag him into this. But I needed clarity. "Chris," I said, keeping my voice low, "that guy Kathleen's been talking to, do you know who he is?" His face shifted instantly. He looked past me toward the bar, then back at me. "You mean Jared?" "Jared," I repeated. "Right?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, about that." My stomach dropped. "You're gonna want to sit down for this," he said, already looking uncomfortable. Look, I didn't want to get involved, and I told her that, but she's my sister. "Chris. Please." He nodded. "I found out a few weeks ago. They've been seeing each other." She told me it was just emotional, that it started as a connection from some wellness retreat. I didn't press. Honestly, I didn't think it was serious. But then last week, she made a comment. "What kind of comment?" Chris looked down at his beer. She said Jared reminded her of me, but more attractive. I felt like I'd been punched. I confronted her about it, he continued. Told her it was messed up. She got defensive. Said it wasn't about attraction, that it was about feeling understood. But Trevor, she's been lying to you. For months. The silence between us was crushing. I nodded, mostly to stop myself from doing something I'd regret. Thank you for telling me. He looked pained. I'm sorry, man. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't blame him. I didn't even feel anger in that moment. Just a dull, thudding emptiness. When the party ended, I didn't ride home with Kathleen. I told her I had to catch up with an old friend from work and took an Uber instead. She didn't protest. She didn't even look surprised. Back at home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, staring out at the backyard through the kitchen window, just letting the silence stretch. There was no more wondering now. No more guessing. The man at the bar. The whispered conversations. The lipstick on the wine glass. The deflections. The elegant clothes. The secretive smiles. All the signs I'd tried to explain away had coalesced into a truth I couldn't unsee. Kathleen was having an affair. Not just a fling, not just a moment of weakness. An actual, planned, ongoing affair with a man who just laughed with her like they were building something together. With a man she'd compared favorably to her own brother. And she hadn't even tried to hide it. I thought about the years we'd shared. The road trips. The holidays with mismatched wrapping paper. The way she used to fall asleep against my shoulder during old movies. I thought about how hard I'd worked to give her stability. How I kept climbing, building, pushing for a life that I thought we both wanted. And I thought about how, somewhere along the way, she'd stopped wanting it. Or maybe she'd never wanted it at all. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, letting the quiet hollow me out. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I didn't tell her what I knew. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. I just packed a bag, left a note that said I needed space, and drove out to the Canyon cabin, our training lodge. I needed time. But more than that, I needed clarity. Because now, this wasn't just a marriage problem. It was something much deeper. And I had a feeling I was only beginning to uncover how far it went. The cabin was cold when I arrived, almost too quiet. It sat a few miles into the canyon, just enough off-grid to K*LL reception, but close enough to town to get groceries if needed. We'd bought it 4 years ago as a training base for my adventure gear startup. Back then, Kathleen had loved it here. She used to say the stillness helped her think. Now, the stillness just echoed. I lit the fireplace and collapsed into the old leather chair by the window, the one with the busted armrest and the view of the ridge. For the first time in days, I could actually breathe. No lying eyes across the dinner table. No half excuses. No tension thick enough to cut. Just quiet. And the heavy truth settling into my bones. Kathleen had betrayed me. Not just in body, but in spirit. And yet, part of me kept circling the same question: why didn't she hide it better? The rooftop party had felt almost staged. Like she wanted to be seen. Or at least, didn't care if she was. That wasn't just recklessness, it was audacity. Or maybe it was something else. Something deliberate. That thought followed me the next morning as I opened my laptop and pulled up the business accounts. I didn't expect to find anything. Honestly, I just wanted a distraction. Something mechanical: spreadsheets, invoices, vendor updates. Anything to take my mind off mirrored sunglasses and whispered rooftop confessions. But instead, I found a discrepancy. It was a small thing at first. A single invoice approval that didn't come from me. A $2,500 payout to a company I didn't recognize. Halwell Consulting LLC. Colorado-based. Vague service description. Client strategy implementation. I blinked. We didn't outsource strategy. That was my role. Curious, I dug deeper. Over the last 5 months, Halwell had been paid 4 times. The amounts were increasing: $2,500, then $4,100, then $6,000. The last payment? $9,850. That got my full attention. I pulled the business credit card logs. The approvals had my digital signature, but the timestamps didn't match when I was logged in. That was strange. I always signed approvals manually, after cross-checking vendor reports. No exceptions. I opened the vendor folder on our cloud drive and searched for Halwell. Nothing. No onboarding docs. No contracts. No emails. Then I checked the IP logs for our admin account. There it was, a remote login from a Boise IP address right in the middle of the rooftop party week. At a time I knew I hadn't touched the system. My stomach dropped. Someone had accessed our back end. Someone had forged my approvals. And the money hadn't gone to a service provider. It had gone to a shell. I dug up the business registration for Halwell. Filed 6 months ago. Registered agent. Jared Hall. Jared. The man from the rooftop. The man Kathleen had been laughing with. The man she'd leaned into like they were rehearsing a life together. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft. They were using my company, my platform, my work. I leaned back from the screen, heart pounding. Suddenly, the last few months looked different. Kathleen's eagerness to help with finances. Her interest in operations. Her questions about passwords and approval workflows. It wasn't curiosity. It was premeditation. I pulled up our shared calendar. She'd blocked out wellness retreats on weekends when large payments had been processed. And the weeks following each retreat, we'd moved money around to cover unexplained budget shortfalls. All the pieces fit now. Jared was the front. Kathleen was the access point. And I was the mark. My hands were shaking as I opened the internal chat logs. I messaged my operations lead, Anna, pretending to check on a vendor inquiry. She replied quickly, "Weird you ask. I thought you authorized Halwell. Kathleen said you were using them for something under wraps." That hit like a hammer. Kathleen had used my team, my trust. She'd played them all. I went outside to clear my head. The canyon air was sharp, biting. I walked down to the river trail, letting the cold air numb the rage that was boiling up in me. This was no longer a personal matter. It was fraud. Deliberate, calculated financial fraud. And it meant Kathleen wasn't just cheating on me with Jared. She was in business with him. I spent the next 2 days combing every document, every access log, every approval trail. I found 11 forged entries, 6 transfers, 3 vendor deletions, and 2 internal emails deleted from the audit trail, emails I distinctly remembered writing, now gone without a trace. I restored them from the backups. One of them was a memo to myself, drafted 3 months ago. Need to flag Jared Hall for external vendor screening. Company profile incomplete. I never followed up. Kathleen must have seen it, and she made sure it disappeared. It felt surreal, like watching a slow-motion burglary, where you were smiling the whole time and offering the thieves coffee. I knew what I had to do. I called Julian Matz, an old college friend who now worked in the district attorney's office. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he answered on the second ring. "Trevor? Man, it's been a minute. What's up?" "I think I've uncovered fraud," I said. "And it's not random. It's personal." I met with him that evening. I brought my laptop, the drive copies, the logs. He listened quietly, taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification. By the end, he looked up and whistled. "You weren't kidding. Can you help?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but you're going to need to prepare for this to go wider than you think. This Jared guy, he's not just a side character. This is organized, polished. You're probably not the only target." I didn't respond. Couldn't. My world was shifting again. This time, not because my heart was broken, but because my company, my reputation, my identity were under attack. Back at the cabin, I sat in the dark and replayed everything. Kathleen's timing, her interest in logistics, her soft voice when asking about expense approvals. It was all theater. All a setup. She hadn't just fallen out of love. She'd gone to war. Quietly. Carefully. And now it was my turn. Julian didn't waste time. By the following Monday, he'd looped in a cyber forensics specialist named Marcy Nguyen, sharp, direct, and suspicious of everything, which, under the circumstances, made her the perfect fit. We met at a secure facility near the courthouse where they ran through my findings with a kind of clinical precision that made my head spin. "This is clean fraud," Marcy said, scrolling through the forged payment logs. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Access logs match your credentials, but the patterns are off. Like someone was mimicking your behavior but couldn't nail the details. Too perfect." She leaned back, tapping her pen on her tablet. "They also covered their tracks on a shadow drive temp folders outside your usual sync settings. We pulled some of it back. You're going to want to see this." She slid a laptop across the table and opened a folder labeled recovered_chatlogs_kjh. I scanned through the files. The usernames were anonymized, but the conversation threads told their own story. Dozens of messages between two accounts, K and J. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was who. The messages were meticulous, organized by date and timestamp. The tone shifted over time. Early threads were cautious, discussions of financial routing, plausible fronts, and ways to bypass alerts. Later messages turned more personal, more in asterisk mate. K, if he finds out, it's all over. We need to be out by July. J, he won't. You're the brains. I'm the charm. K, charm's overrated. But your offshore contact in Madrid came through. J, we're set. Spain's a done deal. New names, new accounts, no more baggage. Spain. Offshore accounts. New names. They weren't just stealing. They were planning to disappear. I kept scrolling, each message like another knife to the chest. K, sometimes I think about just telling him. Getting it over with. J, and lose everything? You're not a quitter. K, no. I'm just tired of pretending. He still brings me coffee in bed. It's exhausting. That one stopped me cold. The memory hit hard. Just 2 weeks ago, I'd surprised her with breakfast and coffee after she'd had a stressful week. She smiled, thanked me, even kissed my forehead. That morning, I'd left thinking maybe we were finding our way back. But she was already gone. She just stayed long enough to take what she needed. I pushed the laptop away, breathing hard. Julian looked at me. I know this is a lot. No, I said. It's not a lot. It's enough. He nodded. We're freezing Helwell's accounts. Marcy's also backtracing all fund movements from your business. Most of it's recoverable. But we're going to need to loop in legal representation. You'll be at the center of this case. I didn't care. I just wanted it to stop. Later that evening, I called Anna, my operations lead, and told her everything. She didn't cry, didn't ask pointless questions. She just got quiet. I trusted her, she said eventually. We all did. I know, I replied. You don't need to explain. I want in, she added after a pause. On whatever this becomes. Legal recourse. Damage control. All of it. I'm not walking away from the company we built because someone else turned it into a con. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. You're in. I'll need everyone we trust. The next day, Julian and Marcy helped me coordinate a team. We made contact with the State Financial Crimes Unit, filed a preliminary claim, and started building the framework for a full fraud indictment. It was messy. It was invasive. But it was necessary. The most surreal moment came that Thursday afternoon when Marcy called me with a clipped tone in her voice. We recovered her external drive from a cloud mirror. It wasn't password protected. She paused, then added, Trevor, you're going to want to see the file labeled Last Days. I opened it in the parking lot of the courthouse, sitting in my truck while traffic buzzed around me. It was a document several pages long. A mixture of journal entries and logistical notes, written like she knew the whole plan might collapse and she'd need a record to start again. One passage read, Trevor isn't stupid. He's just trusting. That's always been his weakness. He builds things and assumes no one would want to take them. Jared thinks we're weeks ahead of him, but I'm not so sure anymore. If this blows up, we'll have to move faster. Spain is still the goal. But if I have to go alone, I will. I won't drown in someone else's regrets. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. That night, I went back to the canyon cabin. I lit the fireplace and poured myself a glass of bourbon, one of the few indulgences I kept for late nights and hard wins. This didn't feel like a win, but it felt like something close to clarity. I stared at the flames and thought about the years I'd spent building a life with someone who saw me not as a partner, but as a resource. Something to be leveraged, managed, exploited. I thought about the friends who stayed. About Anna, who didn't blink. About Julian, who dropped everything to help me fight. About Marcy, who didn't know me but chose to treat my case like it mattered. And I realized something. The people who mattered, the people who showed up, weren't just allies. They were my defense. My protection. My future. The next morning, Julian handed me a preliminary litigation package. Civil and criminal components. Asset recovery requests. Digital surveillance warrants. We were ready. Kathleen didn't know it yet. But the game she'd been playing? It was over. And now, for the first time in months, I was the one making the next move. With the legal groundwork set, I knew the next step wasn't just about lawyers or courtrooms. It was about legacy, about making sure the truth didn't get rewritten by the people who had tried to erase mine. And for that, I needed to talk to Kathleen's family. Her parents had always been kind to me. Her mom, Claire, especially. We'd bonded over hiking trails and slow Sunday dinners. Her father, Raymond, was more reserved but steady. When Kathleen and I got married, they gave us a small framed quote, "Truth builds where silence rots." At the time, I thought it was about communication. Now, it felt like a prophecy. I asked to meet them privately. Just me, no lawyers. They agreed with hesitation. We sat in their dining room, sunlight filtering through linen curtains, the smell of chamomile tea steeping in the background. Claire offered me a cup. I declined. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said. "But I think you deserve to know what's been happening." I laid out the timeline, Kathleen's affair, the fraudulent transfers, the forged documents, Jared's identity. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the facts. And then I showed them the recovered messages. Claire read them slowly, her hand trembling as she turned each page. Raymond stayed silent, but his jaw clenched tighter with every sentence. When I finished, Claire looked up, tears in her eyes. "We had no idea." "I believe you," I said. Raymond stood, walked to the window, then finally spoke. "We'll help. Whatever you need." The plan came together quickly. Kathleen was invited to their home under the pretense of a medical emergency, her mother's dizzy spells, a recurring but harmless condition. When she arrived, Julian's team was ready with a court officer and a sealed envelope. Inside, a notification of asset freeze, a subpoena for her digital records, and a pending fraud investigation under her name. Her face, I'm told, went pale. Claire couldn't even look at her. Kathleen didn't say a word. She just turned and left. The investigation moved faster than expected. Jared Hall, it turned out, wasn't just playing games in Idaho. He was already on a watch list in Oregon for suspicious charity fund flows, using similar shell companies and layered accounts to move money through legitimate fronts. Once Kathleen's messages were added to the chain, the case cracked open. She was more than a pawn. She had been actively coordinating with Jared, proposing payment schedules, suggesting cover clients, even discussing offshore relocation. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she folded. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to testify against Jared and provide full access to their planning files. Her cooperation helped expose an entire network, a web of similar scams tied to manipulated vendor agreements and fake consultancy contracts across multiple states. The court proceedings were brutal, public, but necessary. Jared was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. Kathleen received a lighter sentence, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, but no jail time. Just years of probation, a felony record, and court-ordered restitution. I recovered 80% of the funds. The court allowed a portion to be distributed to clients affected by Jared's shell company. The rest came back to me and my business. I didn't celebrate, but I did breathe. The people who had tried to rewrite my story were finally silenced by their own words. And the life I thought I'd lost? It wasn't gone. It was waiting.